In a dark corner of the world, the mayor of a town dragged two people out of a sealed cellar and handed them over to some other men. One of the men asked for their price, which was 5 silver coins, and with a look of disgust, he bought them, thinking he could just toss them off to someone else. Afterward, the villagers nearby didn't seem to object, as they were just glad that their village was finally rid of those who served evil gods. Meanwhile, people in this world still wondered why they could use magic from ancient times, but there was never an answer. So, they continued to chant their favorite magic spells for various purposes at different times, including in times of war. Right now, somewhere in a dark forest, a mercenary mage was chanting a spell to attack some other guys. But as he was focusing on his magic, a sword pierced straight through his head. This just goes to show that while magic is powerful, it's not always invincible. If a sword flies straight at a caster, they'll die, just like this mage did. Aldis, with a terrifyingly sharp gaze, was fighting several assassins who had apparently come to take his life. When he asked them who they were and why they were attacking him, suddenly, one assassin couldn't answer, terrified by the deaths of the others caused by this powerful sword magic. Aldis targeted the assassin with more swords to keep him from escaping, but in the end, he killed him, realizing there was no point in keeping the man alive. However, more assassins were still hiding in the trees, and though they launched a surprise attack on Aldis, he easily blocked it with his sword. The assassin was shocked to be discovered, but for Aldis, it was nothing. He could clearly sense the killer's bloodlust from the start. Aldis didn't really want to kill anyone, but even though this assassin wasn't taken down immediately, he still attacked Aldis with his own style of swordsmanship. Not wanting to waste time, Aldis sent the man's sword flying. Leaving him vulnerable and wondering how a mage could have such skill, Aldis cut his thoughts short with a definitive answer. He wasn't a mage, but a swordsman. And then he swung his sword through the assassin's neck. Afterward, he left the forest and returned to the port town of Thoria, a place that prospered thanks to the blessings of the forest and its coastal trade. It was the second largest town in the kingdom of Nogres. As soon as he arrived, Aldis reported the attack to his friends in the mercenary group and their leader, Ted. Ted asked if he'd really killed them all without getting any information. Aldis replied that there was no point in keeping one alive for information since they were after his life anyway. So, killing them was the logical choice. Ted explained to Aldis that it would have been better to gather some intel, but for Aldis, he just didn't want the hassle and preferred to end things quickly. His teammates, like Norris the archer and Ophelia the mage, knew Aldis was a brute who often killed his enemies ruthlessly, instead of using his abilities to their fullest. They asked if he knew who the attackers were, and Aldis said no, other than that they seemed to know about his sword magic. Ophelia pointed out that if they knew about that, there was a high chance they were connected to the military. Hearing the word military, Aldis recalled the trouble he'd caused with a certain general who had tried to convince Aldis to join the army. Aldis had flatly refused the general, saying he was under no obligation to teach his sword magic to the military. The general had asked how he dared to speak to him that way. The general had actually learned of Aldis while he was on a mission escorting a merchant, during which a battle broke out between the army and some bandits. The bandits were far more numerous, and it seemed the soldiers were having a hard time. Some of the bandits tried to rob the merchant Aldis was escorting at the time. Aldis used his sword magic to take care of them. And news of this caught the general's attention, leading him to approach Aldis with an invitation to join the army. The general said that joining the military meant a better income and guaranteed daily necessities, something Aldis couldn't have as an ordinary person. However, Aldis couldn't have cared less. To mock the general, he demanded he sign a contract if he really wanted him to join, for a fee of 500 gold coins a month. Hearing this, the general became furious, as this amount was 500 times his own salary. His soldiers advised him to calm down, while Aldis simply walked away and went back to his work instead of wasting any more time there. He figured the general was the one being arrogant towards him, so he refused and also made it clear that his sword magic couldn't be taught to others. Even so, Ophelia said he still shouldn't have rejected the general so rudely by humiliating him in front of everyone like that, which would only make the general hold a grudge against him. Norris laughed and agreed that it was because of things like this that Aldis made more enemies. As usual, Ted told him not to laugh about it, and Ted admitted to Aldis that his strength was indeed terrifying, but he shouldn't be making so many enemies. Aldis understood what Ted meant, and since he was indebted to him and the others, he didn't want to cause them any trouble. So he agreed to be on his best behavior when dealing with the nobles and the church, but they all knew how difficult that would be. Ted bet 3 copper coins that Aldis wouldn't show a shred of discipline. Ophelia joined in, betting 5 copper coins that Aldis would have no discipline due to his awkwardness. Norris immediately bet a whole silver coin on Aldis without even knowing what discipline was. After that, they set off for the Caucasus Forest, located south of Thoria. This forest had been a vital source of fuel, food, and medicinal herbs since ancient times, becoming a pillar that supported the growth of the town of Thoria. However, it was also home to many wild animals and unexplored regions where monsters dwelled. Ted and his party came to this forest on a request to find a good spot for logging. To fulfill this request, they needed to venture into the parts of the forest inhabited by monsters. Ophelia found a spot where they wouldn't run into any problems, as the path seemed to be well maintained and was also close to the main road. She mentioned that the quality of the trees here was also excellent, so they should choose this location. Ted announced to everyone that it was decided, so now they needed to get to work clearing out the monsters in the area, starting by taking out the nearby nest of Twin Blades beasts. He then yelled over to Aldis, telling him to pay more attention. Aldis replied that this was mainly their request, and since he was just tagging along for a bit, it didn't really have much to do with him. Ophelia reminded him that it was never too late to join them, and since they had already teamed up so many times, Aldis was starting to feel like he was part of the group. Aldis said he would think about it, after which Ophelia asked if he still hadn't given up on finding his old companions. Ophelia tried to make him understand that a year had already passed, and if he hadn't found a single clue, she wanted him to realize what that implied. However, Aldis retorted that it had only been a year, which was just a short time to be searching for his friends. Ophelia wished he would just understand, but Aldis remained fixated on his old party. Suddenly, they heard a cry from the distance, echoing and pleading for help. Norris wondered if someone was being attacked nearby, but Ted didn't wait around. He immediately dashed toward the sound of the cry without even thinking about a plan. Ophelia and Norris knew they had to follow Ted, even though it was just like him to always jump in to help people. They all loved that kindness about Ted, so they smiled and followed right behind him. As they went deeper into the forest, they found a large group of bandits who had apparently killed some passing merchants and seized their carriage. They all alerted each other to the bandits, and Ted realized they had arrived too late. Suddenly, the bandits' archers started firing arrows at Ted and the others. Ted moved forward, using his sword and shield to block the arrows. He knew the bandits wouldn't let them go easily, so they engaged in the fight. Norris then asked Aldis to cover him while he fired his arrows, and Aldis used his sword magic to slice through every incoming arrow without fail. Just when the bandits thought they had them cornered, Norris knew exactly who to target, so he took aim at one of the bandits and sent an arrow into his chest. Ophelia asked Ted for the signal to use her magic, but Ted replied that it wasn't the right time yet. Meanwhile, on the bandits' side, their leader was getting desperate, ordering everyone to charge and take out the archer and the wizard, referring to Aldis. Aldis took that personally, and just to let the bandits know he wasn't a wizard, he threw several swords behind the bandits and used his sword magic to run one of them through the head. However, it didn't stop there, as he manipulated that same sword to swing around, slashing the necks of the other bandits. Meanwhile, Ted was fighting the bandit leader head-on. The leader was busy fighting Ted, but when he thought about sending his other men to attack the archer and the wizard, he realized all of them were already dead. He was stunned to see how they had been killed. Ted told him he was the last one standing, and then finished the leader off. Afterward, They checked the bodies of the dead merchants along with the group that was supposed to be protecting them. Norris noted there was nothing more they could do, so they should just take what they could and head back. Ted agreed and told them to avoid carrying anything too heavy. Norris told Aldis to come with him to check the carriage, but when he got there, expecting to find some jewels or treasure, he was shocked by what he saw inside the carriage. Aldis asked him what was wrong. Then Norris stepped out, and Aldis went to check the carriage himself. When he looked inside, he saw two little girls chained by their hands and feet with haunted looks in their eyes. Ted got the children out, feeling bewildered by the scene, because this had made their situation even more complicated. Aldis thought they might be child slaves, so he suggested to Ted that they should take the children back to town. Ted exclaimed that he needed to think about what to do, because not only were these children slaves, but they were also twins, which made things even worse. Aldis asked them what object slaves were, which surprised everyone. Ted asked him if he really didn't know what that meant. Norris laughed because he had also found all of this strange at first. Then Norris explained that object slaves were essentially people bought and sold for money. They could be anyone, from children sold by their parents to criminals or prisoners of war, and the shackles on them restricted their freedom. They also had no legal protection, as they were considered objects. Aldis asked if they were any different from regular slaves, and Norris replied that slaves were still considered human, whereas object slaves were seen as complete objects. They could be treated however their master wished, like having their limbs cut off or anything else, including taking their lives. Norris said that if a person mistreated their slave, their reputation would suffer, but if they mistreated an object slave, people would simply say they were managing their product poorly. In a way, object slaves didn't even have the right to wear clothes. Ted added that the fact that these two were twins was another issue Aldis wasn't aware of. Ted asked Aldis where he could have possibly grown up not to know something so common, explaining that twins were considered taboo children, believed to be disciples of evil gods who brought disaster upon the goddess. Aldis knew this didn't make much sense, as Ophelia had informed him that the goddess was known as the greatest being in this world, the creator of the earth who loved life. However, during the previous war in the divine realm, an evil god named Grace had confronted the goddess, and the ones who had wounded the goddess were vanguards known as the two demons. Aldis's expression changed slightly upon hearing about the two demons. Ted then told him not to make such a scary face, thinking Aldis might hate the goddess. But putting that aside, Ophelia said that the church considered all twins to carry an unforgivable sin. Aldis asked her if she believed in such a story, and she replied that as far as she was concerned, it was just a myth. But regardless, life here was truly harsh for any pair of twins. Finally, as night approached, they decided to take the twins with them, a decision made mostly by Aldis. Ted said that was probably for the best, as he hadn't wanted to leave them there alone either. However, Ted also mentioned that if these kids were normal, they could sell them in town, but since they were twins, no one would want to buy them, as twins were usually discarded at birth. Aldis asked what would happen to the children if they couldn't find a buyer, and they answered that unsold goods would be killed. Or at the very least, whatever happened to them wouldn't be good. Aldis insisted on an example, making everyone realize that he was planning to take the twins with him. Norris replied that, first of all, the children wouldn't be treated well at all. Not only that, but with the shackles on their legs, they couldn't even walk properly. Aldis figured if that was the problem, he approached the children and used 3 spells derived from formula analysis: disarm trap, remove shackles, and synchronized power release on all of the chains. Then, Ophelia ran over worriedly, calling Aldis's name to tell him that the shackles of object slaves couldn't be removed so easily because the shackles were all linked together. They were set up so that if one was removed, the others would burst into flames. But by the time her explanation reached Aldis, he had already removed all the shackles from the twins' hands and feet. Everyone was stunned by the sight, while Aldis acted as if it was no big deal. He explained he had removed all three at the same time to ensure they wouldn't activate. Ted and Norris started laughing at yet another one of Aldis's strange actions. Meanwhile, Ophelia shouted, asking how that was possible. She demanded that Aldis explain how he did it, and he replied that he simply released them all at once. She said that casting multiple spells at once was impossible, especially without any incantations. Aldis asked Ophelia why she thought incantations were necessary to use magic, since it was much more flexible not to have to use such roundabout methods. Aldis then stood up and declared that he would be taking the twins with him, and that he himself would be responsible for them. Ted and Norris asked if he was serious, while Aldis said he would give up his share of the goods from the cart in exchange for this. Ted tried to get him to reconsider, since there was nothing in it for him. Aldis admitted that it was true he gained nothing from this. But if what Ophelia had said earlier was correct, he felt it would be too irresponsible to abandon these children. Ted told him to do as he pleased, adding that it wasn't so bad, since he hadn't wanted to abandon the children either. Aldis apologized for the trouble, and he also assured the twins that he would never leave these collars on them again. After that, he went to sleep, while the twins wondered what was happening, since this was something that had never happened to them before. The next day, they left to return to town, and on the way, Aldis told Ophelia that using incantations to summon magic was just a misunderstanding on the part of the mages. He used the example of a swordsman who doesn't need to shout to use his techniques. Ophelia said that magic is completely different from swordsmanship. Aldis asked if that were the case, why their bodies moved at will without any chanting or processing. She couldn't argue with that, while Ted added that this was interesting, since no one had ever really questioned why their bodies could move at will before. Norris asked if this meant that using magic was as easy for Aldis as walking was for them, to which Aldis replied that it was pretty accurate. Ophelia still wasn't used to it, as using 4 different spells at once was still difficult to pull off. Norris said they should try to get Aldis into their party, because letting someone as unusual as him get away would be a waste. Ted also said he'd welcome it with open arms. Aldis simply replied that he'd think about it. Ted asked everyone not to let anyone know about the 2 children, as it could attract more trouble for them. Aldis remembered that he still had to take care of the 2 kids, as they were still scared and clinging to each other. Aldis gave them some children's dresses he found in the carriage. Although there was still a lot of uncertainty, it wasn't long before the gates of Thoria town came into view. However, when the guards at the gate saw the 2 children, their reaction was anything but normal. Instead, they looked angry. Norris approached the guards and asked them not to look at the 2 children so angrily, as they were only escorting them. But the guards insisted that bringing twins into the town would cause chaos. Inside the town, Norris went up to the guards and discreetly slipped some money into their hands. The guards understood the meaning behind it, and the guards told them not to cause any trouble inside. With that taken care of, Aldis was able to enter the town with the 2 children. As they entered, Norris called out to Aldis, asking him to pay him back the money he used for the guards. Norris warned Aldis again that he needed to be more careful when he was with the 2 children and to try not to make any more enemies. Aldis thanked him for his help, and Ted replied that it was nothing to worry about. They would now head back to report their findings. Ophelia told Aldis that if he needed help with anything that required a woman's touch, she would help as much as she could. After that, they left, and now Aldis thought he should head back to the inn where he usually stayed, hoping they would have enough room for the 2 children. Suddenly, Aldis heard a man shout upon seeing the twins. When everyone else noticed, they started asking why there were twins in this town. They called it a disgusting sight, and as night fell, Aldis was forced to keep moving from one inn to another. He hadn't expected things to be this bad, because when he returned to his inn, the owner kicked him out just for having the 2 children with him. She didn't want to keep them, even though Aldis offered to pay for them. She acted as if Aldis had some kind of grudge against her, bringing twins to her establishment. Everywhere he went, people seemed to have a grudge against twins, which was worse than Aldis had imagined. He looked at the 2 children, saw that they looked like they couldn't take any more of this hatred, and thought he needed to do something quickly. Then a girl called out to him and asked if he was looking for a place to stay. If so, she invited him to stay at her inn. Aldis replied that he'd be glad to stay, but the more important question was whether the 2 children with him could come along. The girl initially said that bringing children wasn't a problem. But when she realized they were actually twins, she was taken aback for a moment. After a while, Aldis entered the room with food in his hands, remembering how the girl had let him stay, albeit at double the normal price. At least she wasn't a bad person. Now, Aldis placed the food on the table and told the 2 children to come eat before it got cold. But Aldis noticed that while he was eating, the 2 children didn't seem to be coming over to eat. So he finished his own meal and went to bed, leaving the food on the table. After a few hours, Aldis couldn't sleep because he was worried about the 2 children. He got up to check if they had fallen asleep without eating, but luckily, the plates on the table were clean, meaning the children had eaten. After going back to bed, Aldis wondered if perhaps they couldn't eat properly when someone was staring at them. He then noticed that the 2 children were shivering from the cold and were still huddled closely together. Aldis couldn't help but imagine what kind of treatment they had endured up until now. Just because they were twins. Aldis felt sad for them, so he put a blanket over them, while promising himself he would protect them both. These children didn't have a good past, as Aldis realized, because even though they had lived together for a long time, they had been through many harsh situations. However, things weren't always like this. The 2 children only began to realize they weren't normal after they disobeyed their mother's warning and snuck outside to play. When people saw them, they started throwing stones at them, and they realized that because of their very existence as twins, they were despised by everyone. Their parents cried when they found out and held the 2 children tightly, apologizing to them. After that, they didn't dare sneak out again, haunted by the memory of the outside world, but their peaceful life soon came to an end, when their village was attacked by a beast, killing their father. As for their mother, she did her best to raise the 2 children alone, and in the process she overworked herself until she fell gravely ill and passed away half a year later. That was the day the suffering in the twin children's lives began. When the door burst open, a group of people from the village appeared. They captured the 2 children and locked them in a hut until they could find a buyer. Even as they were deemed slaves of the evil gods, the girls hadn't even had time to grieve their mother's loss. Half a month later, they were taken out of the hut and chained by the legs before being sold to others. The 2 children could never forget the contemptuous looks from the villagers. From then on, they lived their days imprisoned in a traveling carriage. Every time they arrived in a new town, they were handed over to someone else. Though their handlers changed, the treatment of the 2 children never did. At some point, they were kept covered with a cloth and were only fed pieces of stale, rotten bread, usually only when a man came to visit. They hoped this would be the end of their suffering, but in reality, it only brought more torture and beatings from that person. The 2 children wondered why they were being treated this way. They couldn't understand the reason, lacking knowledge and experience. In the end, all they came to understand was that they were called slaves of the evil god. And if they didn't resist, they wouldn't be beaten by the adults. Besides being given a little food occasionally, they just wished they could go home and see their parents again. But there was nothing left for them to return to. Even as children, they had to endure such fears, wondering if they showed emotion or cried, would they be beaten again? Or if they talked back, would they be punished? And so, the 2 children completely shut themselves off and remained silent. The only thing the 2 sisters could do was cling to the last bit of warmth by holding each other tightly, suppressing their emotions. That was all these poor children could do. Until one day, things began to change. That change happened when Aldis found the 2 sisters. The first time they saw Aldis, they thought the person who had tortured them had appeared once again. However, for some reason, Aldis's eyes reminded them of their parents. It was only later that they realized Aldis didn't hate them at all. He was the one who removed their shackles, carried them on his back, and even gave them plenty of food and a place to live. The sisters didn't know how to react when Aldis offered them food. They thought he might hit them if they dared to touch it. They saw the worried look on Aldis's face. And when he went to bed without clearing the table, the two sisters began to eat. That was the first day they were able to sleep soundly, freed from the pain of hunger. The two sisters' lives were still filled with anxiety, but this was just the beginning of an interesting life for the boy and the two sisters. From their perspective, the boy would go out in the morning and return in the evening. He told them to sit and eat with him, but the two sisters were still too afraid to move. Even so, they loved living in a warm room where they could eat their fill without anything scary or painful happening to them. It was like a dream come true. The only time the two sisters felt scared was when they had to leave the room to use the toilet. And other people saw them. The sisters overheard people telling each other they should avoid being seen together. But since they were each other's only family and ally, they couldn't bear to be separated, even for a moment. Now, on this particular night, Aldis brought food for the two sisters as usual, and the two sisters sat in a corner. He thought that nothing would be different from any other day if he didn't do something about the situation. So, Aldis went and sat down next to the two sisters. He took some food and told one of the sisters to open her mouth. The girl hesitated, but when she saw the kind smile on his face, she opened her mouth for Aldis to feed her. She enjoyed eating the food while Aldis fed her younger sister with a spoon. He told them to take their time eating, and then realized the two sisters were actually crying. He asked if the food was too hot, but regardless, after that incident, the sisters were finally able to eat with him. They wondered what Aldis meant to them, and then he thought it was a good time to ask for the sisters' names. For the first time, the sisters answered. The girl on the right was named Philia, and the one on the left was Rihanna. After half a month had passed, Aldis informed them that they would be leaving the inn. Philia and Rihanna saw him talking to the innkeeper about it, and it was clear they had to leave because the sisters had been seen by someone else. Aldis told the sisters that he had rented a house and would take them there. Aldis's house was located just outside of town, and he assured them that they could feel comfortable here. Aldis said they didn't need to worry about being seen, so they could run, jump, and play freely. When asked, the two sisters expressed that they liked this place more. After moving into the new house, the sisters became less anxious, but they still couldn't talk comfortably with Aldis. Trouble struck one day when Aldis returned home, and was surprised to find Rihanna wasn't well. They tried to wake her and ask what was wrong. After putting Rihanna in bed and checking on her, Aldis discovered she had a fever. Aldis hoped that Rihanna's condition wasn't serious. And while he couldn't rely on the healers from the church or Ted's group who were away on a mission, he knew he had to do something himself. Philia begged Aldis to do something to help Rihanna's condition, or else she would die. Seeing her worried expression, Aldis thought hard until he remembered someone once told him you could bring down a fever by cooling the person's head. Aldis got a damp cloth and placed it on Rihanna's head, then mixed some medicine into a rice ball and slowly fed it to her. Philia wondered why Aldis was doing so much for them, and seeing her nervous expression, he asked her what was wrong. Philia couldn't stop herself from asking why Aldis treated them so kindly, even though they were servants of the evil god. She told him she had heard from everyone that they were enemies of the goddess, and that anyone who treated them kindly would be cursed. She couldn't control her trembling, as she hadn't dared to ask anything of her own free will in a long time. Aldis felt responsible and told her that he knew Philia and Rihanna were not servants of the evil god. Philia didn't expect that answer, as he sat down and told her that everyone had been deceived by the goddess, and that she was just a normal human being like everyone else. He explained that the reason her parents had treated them kindly was because they also knew the truth, that she and Rihanna weren't servants of the evil god, but their own children. Philia recalled that her mother had cried before, and that was probably the reason why. Aldis assured her that he knew that too, so he would do everything to protect both girls. He didn't want Philia to call herself a servant of the evil god anymore, because she and Rihanna had never done anything wrong. Philia and Rihanna cried with relief that day, and Aldis grew closer to the two girls. The next day, Rihanna's fever had gone down, but then Philia came down with a fever. During this time, Aldis stayed by their side until they had fully recovered. He felt glad because this time, the two sisters were able to sleep more peacefully than ever before. Meanwhile, on some plains, a woman stood on a path that people often traveled. She had a strong feeling that what she was looking for would soon appear here, so she decided to stay in that spot. Back at Aldis's house, he was now used to being welcomed by the girls whenever he came home. They would often ask for food when they were hungry. He would then tell them he'd prepare food right away, and he'd start peeling apples. The girls were always by his side as if he were their safe place. At night, Aldis would often read them stories until they fell asleep. But whenever Aldis went back to his bed and lay down, he'd find the girls right beside him. The next day, he brought them some grilled meat skewers, and it was the first time the girls had ever tasted this dish. They eagerly chewed on the grilled skewers, and when Aldis asked if they liked the food, they showed their delight with smiles on their faces. For Aldis, it felt like it had been a very long time since he'd been able to experience such peaceful moments. However, he still ran into some problems. As Ted and the others came to Aldis's house to ask if he was going to start working again, Aldis reminded Ted not to get near the children with his scary face. While Ted's concern came from the fact that Aldis had been turning down all recent job offers, as if he didn't want to make money anymore. They were worried about him, but at the same time, they were happy to see that Aldis seemed to be getting along with the girls. Norris asked if Aldis was okay and suggested he should start working again, while also bringing him some interesting information. Norris asked Aldis if he had heard about the beautiful woman who had appeared on the main road. Aldis knew nothing about it, while rumors had already spread throughout the town of Thoria. When someone travels from Thoria to the capital, about half a day later, they'll come across a young woman standing there all alone. It's said that she's challenged every mercenary who passes by, and without a doubt, has defeated them all. Aldis asked if she was a bandit, but Norris replied that the woman doesn't take anything. Even when she challenges people, no one has actually died or been injured. If people refuse the challenge, she just lets them pass. Norris said she's very strong, but seems to be a harmless eccentric. And aside from a few people, no one sees her as a problem. Aldis asked why some people found it to be a problem, and Norris answered that it was because of their pride. If they let an oddball like that exist, they wouldn't be able to walk with their heads held high. Aldis understood that the client was the Lord of Thoria. And while the woman on the road refused to give her name or any information, the request from the Lord was to negotiate with her and bring her to his mansion. Aldis asked why the Lord would want to hire mercenaries when he could just assign his own soldiers. Norris said that the Lord might not want to send his own envoys, or had already been rejected before. The reward for this request is 2 gold coins. Aldis said that was too little for 4 people, but the others replied that they were actually handling other requests and were giving this one to Aldis because they thought it would be good for him. Philia and Rihanna asked if he was going out. Aldis asked them in return if they could stay home and wait for him. He assured them that he would be back and told them not to worry. After that, he left and headed straight for the requested location at an incredible speed. He figured it would normally take about 2 hours to get there. But to get there faster, he used flight magic while pretending to run, so that others wouldn't find him strange. Because in this world, using flight magic or nonverbal spells was something out of the ordinary. Meanwhile, some random mercenaries were being defeated one after another, leaving the onlookers shocked to see the woman take down 10 men with ease. At that moment, Aldis arrived and quickly came to a stop. Before Aldis could get any closer to the others, the woman was a little disappointed that she couldn't find anyone who could last against her for even 10 seconds. Without delay, she asked if anyone else wanted to challenge her, and that she wouldn't mind if they all attacked her at once. She stood there, ready to crush them. One mercenary stepped up to challenge her, and the others hoped he could give the woman an interesting fight. The mercenary Gandalf declared that he had been using weapons since before she was even born. Hearing this, the woman named Nayli drew a small knife. Gandalf charged straight at her with his spear, but she suddenly vanished from his sight and instantly appeared right on top of his spear. Nail rushed forward with incredible speed and placed the knife at Gandalf's neck, declaring it her victory. The surrounding mercenaries were stunned to see Nail's true power, and Aldis was among them, unable to believe his eyes. because no matter how you looked at it, the speed Nail displayed was clearly not something an ordinary person could achieve. Nal once again asked if anyone else wanted to challenge her. Then Aldis excused himself through the crowd and stepped forward, approaching Niley. The others tried to warn Aldis, but he kept walking. This made Nail think that he was her next opponent. She smiled, preparing for the next battle, but Aldis clearly told her that he came to negotiate and had no intention of fighting. Nala grew angry hearing that, and while Aldis tried to reason with her, Nal threw a knife at him without any warning. Aldis used a transparent shield magic to block the blade, and he demanded that Nail listen to what he had to say. Aldis told her that aiming for the throat of someone who came to negotiate wasn't exactly a friendly gesture. Nail replied that she had no interest in talking to him, but if he really wanted her to listen, then Aldis would have to convince her through combat. Aldis understood that what Nail really wanted was a fight, while Nail warned him that he could convince her simply by defeating her. As Nayli charged forward, intending to end it quickly, Aldis used earth magic to form an earthen wall, but Nail easily broke through it and said she'd make better use of those rocks. Nail formed throwable stones from the debris, which struck Aldis as unusual. But before he could react, Nail fired the sharp stones at him. Aldis used his magic shield to block them all. Suddenly, a fire magic attack rushed at him from his blind spot, but Aldis managed to dodge it thanks to his agility. Aldis quickly sensed Nail's presence behind him, so he flipped in midair to evade her line of attack. Nal, realizing Aldis was quite skilled, decided to step things up by firing a direct wind attack at him before he could even regain his footing. Aldis knew he'd be in trouble if he took that attack head-on. Therefore, he crouched and used his shield magic at an angle to repel Nail's attack, redirecting it elsewhere. She asked him just who he was, and Aldis had the same question for her. Meanwhile, the onlookers were all surprised to learn that Nail was a mage, and that Aldis was holding his own against her. This was the first time Aldis had seen someone other than himself use magic without chanting, which truly made him question her identity. Their fight grew more intense over time, as Nail showed no signs of holding back against Aldis, while he was trying to fight with feigned techniques just to make sure the people around them wouldn't grow suspicious of him. Nail noticed this, so she asked him why he had to pretend to use fake spells just to hold back his power. But when she glanced at the onlookers, she understood that he wanted to keep it a secret. So, Nail decided to get rid of all of them, and used wind magic to blow all the mercenaries hundreds of meters away. Aldis stood his ground, watching as the others were swept away. Nal noticed there were still a few people left nearby, and deciding that wasn't enough, she created an even larger magic attack. Seeing this, Aldis watched as everyone fled from the two of them as fast as they could. Niley launched the attack at Aldis, and to counter it, he created a sharp magic shield that sliced Nail's attack apart. She told him he could go all out now, since she'd removed the obstacles. Aldis replied that it was pointless asking her to negotiate. Even so, Nail said that hadn't changed, and he would still have to defeat her to make her listen. Now, Aldis decided to fight for real as he drew his swords, which gave Nail a better understanding of his fighting style. Aldis's swords flew around him thanks to his sword magic, as he asked Nayli if she still wanted him to go all out. He warned her to try not to be defeated too quickly, as he sent all the swords down to attack her. Nail struggled to block all the swords flying toward her. As they seemed to be endless, she tried to repel them with her own swords, and then used a shield to block them. But there were still many swords she couldn't avoid. She wondered what would happen if she simply destroyed the area. And as she did so, Aldis himself had to shield himself from the flying rocks. Nail flew over Aldis's head and charged in, attacking with multiple light magic strikes. Seeing this, Aldis did the same, and the two of them stared at each other with defiant eyes. They both unleashed powerful magic attacks, with neither of them holding back. When their attacks collided, a huge explosion occurred, even bigger than the last one. After the explosion settled and the dust began to clear, Nal landed on the ground coughing, but she had no time to catch her breath. Aldis quickly rushed in with his sword in hand, and Nail managed to block him. Their battle had shifted to a close-quarters sword fight, and Nail was surprised to realize that he was actually a swordsman. Aldis was happy that someone finally saw him for what he was, and with his next slash, he sent Nail's daggers flying and pointed his sword at her neck. Aldis had defeated Nail without injuring her. Then, he asked if she was satisfied with that outcome. Nail knew she had lost, so she smiled and called Aldis milord. Aldis didn't understand what she meant, but he knew asking would do much good. Meanwhile, in the town of Thoria, the twins were out exploring again out of curiosity. They wanted to wander through the town just once, and the peaceful life had made them let their guard down. Philia and Rihanna were excited to see so many people and large houses all around. Philia ran ahead of Rihanna in her excitement, but she suddenly tripped and fell. An old man approached and asked if she was okay, checking to see if she was hurt. When he saw her sister next to her, he asked which one of them was the older sister. The old man smiled as he remarked that they looked very similar, but he also felt something was strange because they looked too alike. When he learned they were twins, the old man was surprised and looked around, then told the girls it must be difficult for them to live like this. Looking at the two with pity in his eyes, the old man warned them to make sure they always kept their hoods on and to leave immediately. And he specifically told them not to let anyone see their faces. That was the first time the girls realized there might be other kind people besides Aldis. Back to Aldis, Nail admitted that she hadn't expected Aldis to be so strong. While Aldis was still wondering who Nail was referring to, she confirmed she was talking about him. Nail thought that Aldis was the one who had surpassed the limits of humanity. And now that she had found him, she felt that Aldis was worthy of being her lord and she would serve under him. Aldis wanted to stay away from any involvement with Nail, and he asked who she was. He also pointed out that her power was similar to his. He asked Nail if she was like him. Nail replied that she didn't understand what he meant, which made Aldis feel like she was dodging his question. Nail told him she was just his faithful servant, nothing more, nothing less. She assured Aldis that she would always answer his summons, but that only made him feel like she was more trouble than anything else. Aldis repeated that he only came here to ask her to visit the Lord of Thoria. Nail replied that if it was an order, she would agree. Aldis realized there were many things he needed to discuss with her, but this request was the top priority for now. Nail said she would first repair the damage caused by their fight. She used her magic to fill in all the holes, restoring everything to how it was before. The surrounding landscape looked as if no battle had ever taken place. Witnessing her skill, Aldis realized he could do the same. But for someone other than himself to be able to do this without an incantation was bizarre. Nail told Aldis that the job was complete. Afterward, Aldis kept his guard up around her, until he led her to Lord Thoria's mansion. The guard at the gate confirmed that she was the one who had been described, so he agreed to let her in. And Aldis no longer needed to accompany her. The soldier gave Aldis his reward. However, Nail was not happy to see that her master was not going with her. Aldis explained that his only task was to bring her here. Nail didn't want to go to a place that had nothing to do with her lord, so she refused to go, as she didn't care about this place or even Lord Thoria. Aldis had to ask her to wait. Nail said that if this was an order, she would have no problem obeying, so she asked him to confirm if it was indeed an order. Aldis was confused for a moment, then figured if all it took was an order to get her to listen, he would do it. Aldis told her it was an order and requested that Nail meet with the Lord. Nail followed his command and immediately agreed. After that, she headed to the mansion alone. While heading back to town, Aldis thought about how truly vast the world was, since he had never met anyone who could fight on his level like Nail. Meeting her was a first, and there was always a chance someone stronger than her existed somewhere. Someone Aldis had yet to encounter. However, he wanted to look after himself, because there were now people he needed to care for. Aldis returned home and, as usual, was warmly welcomed by Philia and Rihanna. The girls told him that they had made their own lunch today and brought him some sandwiches. Aldis was happy to see their smiling faces, so he told them they should all eat together. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and he told the two of them to quickly hide. When he opened the door, Aldis saw Nail and asked her why she was here. Nail announced that she had come to report the completion of his order. Aldis wondered what she was talking about, until she reminded him about meeting the Lord. Aldis then remembered that had happened. Not wanting to waste any more time with her, he said goodbye and tried to close the door. But Nail stuck her foot in the doorway and asked if there were any other orders. Aldis continued to refuse her, but she stood her ground, insistent on protecting him from inside. Aldis thought that Nail was trying to get him to rent a room to her. He told her that if she was short on money, he would pay for her to stay at an inn. Nail insisted she wasn't lacking money. She simply wanted to be by his side in case of an emergency. Aldis shut the door, not wanting to let Nail in the house because of the girls. Nail said that she would stay outside the door and keep watch. And so she stood there, while Aldis later learned that Nail had been incredibly rude to Lord Thoria, refusing challenges from the soldiers who wanted to verify her strength. Nail had also refused the Lord's offer to become his personal bodyguard, and her rude attitude had earned her their animosity. Although Aldis had returned to his peaceful life, the next morning, he was preparing breakfast for the girls. Philia quickly sat down and began to eat in a hurry, but she burned her tongue on the hot food. Aldis reminded her to eat slowly like Rihanna, and as he looked closely at her, he imagined she was eating just like a squirrel. Their peaceful breakfast went on without a hitch, except for one thing. Niall was still standing outside their house. Philia asked him if that white-haired woman was still outside, and he told the girls to be careful not to let her see them. Aldis was still wary of how Nail addressed him, but regardless, Niall always stood guard at the gate, and whenever Aldis went out, she would follow, sometimes even helping him with his hunts and other tasks. She made his hunts more efficient, and even though he barely knew her, she was reliable. Gradually, a strange sense of trust was established between them, and Aldis wondered if it was really okay to let things go on like this. Then, it started to rain, and Aldis saw the girls looking out the window, worried about Nail getting wet outside. Nail didn't leave her post to stand guard for her master, and the girls were concerned that she didn't have a home or a bed to rest in. Aldis was also shocked to see that she didn't take a break even on rainy days like this. Then, the girls came and handed him a towel to give to Naily, because she must be cold, and being cold is hard, just like not having a home is. Aldis couldn't help but go along with what the kind-hearted girls wanted, so he understood and told them to go back to the room in the back. Then Aldis went to Nail, and she greeted him good morning. He told her she should stay in the inn on rainy days like this, or it would make people think he was bullying her. Nail assured him that she would be fine, but Aldis insisted that wasn't how it looked. That was why he came here. But she still didn't budge, so Aldis told her to wait and offered her the use of the towel in his hand. Nail expressed her gratitude for his concern. Then she took off her hood and dried herself with the towel. Nail was truly beautiful. No one could take their eyes off her, not even with a casual glance. Aldis knew that, but he wanted to stand his ground for the girls' sake. Then Nail said that she wanted him to thank the girls in the house as well. Aldis was quickly on his guard as he asked her how she knew about the girls. Nail replied that he was too naive, but Aldis wanted to know how she could have known they were twins. Nail said she could sense their magical power, from which it was clear they were twins because they had the same magical shape and color. Aldis was wary again, remembering that he still knew nothing about this woman's identity or purpose, but she didn't seem hostile towards him. He wasn't sure if it was safe to reveal anything about the girls to her. But now that she knew, Aldis asked her about her thoughts on the being known as the goddess. Niall didn't want to answer such abstract questions, but her answer was simple. She didn't care about the way of thinking of someone who didn't even exist. Niall didn't believe the goddess existed, and Aldis never expected that someone in this world would think that way. Nail added that the same could be said for other deities, because there are no gods in heaven or on earth. If there were a god, they would be too far away for a human to care about, as they are beyond their reach. Aldis was amazed by her words. Even though this was a world where the goddess and her messengers intervened, he said that if she were right, then what did the church believe in? She replied that that was something only they would know, as she had no knowledge of people she'd never met. They both knew that the gods hated twins, but out of 100 pregnant women, there would be at least one set of twins. It's a natural phenomenon, whether gods exist or not, so hating people just because they're twins is truly foolish. But Nale had assured him that he wouldn't have to worry about her telling anyone about the twins. Be it these children or anyone else, anyone who belongs to Aldis, Nale considers it her duty to protect them. Aldis saw no doubt or hesitation in her eyes, and he told her to swear that she would uphold what she had just said. Nile swore to him on her parents' honor and her duty to keep her promise. Aldis didn't understand much of what Nale had said, but he decided to trust her. That day, Aldis gained a mysterious yet powerful ally by his side. Nale introduced herself to the twins and also thanked them for their kindness with the towel they had sent. However, the twins still seemed wary of her, and Nale realized she might have to wait until they got used to her presence. Aldis introduced the twins to Nale and then asked if she had a name. Nale replied that she hadn't had an official name before and that even Nale wasn't her real name. Aldis was surprised that she didn't have a name and asked who she was. She said he could call her by any name, but that sounded strange. The twins started to think about what they should name Miss Nameless. Aldis also thought that he should come up with a name. And since the name Nale sounded quite nice, he decided to name her Nale from now on. He asked if she was okay with it, and Nale replied that she was perfectly fine with that name. So she greeted them again, saying that she would be in their care from now on. Later, Aldis went to their usual meeting place with Ted's Morningstar group. Norris mentioned that Nale seemed strange, and the fact that her identity was still unclear. Aldis claimed it wasn't a problem for him since she didn't have any prejudice against twins, and there were many other mercenaries with unknown identities as well. Norris mentioned that Aldis was one of them. But regardless, Ophelia added that having Nale live in his house was still a little unsettling. Aldis knew it wouldn't be an issue, recalling how she had so vehemently denied the goddess's existence. Ted said that if Aldis was okay with it, then it was fine, and besides, he mentioned that more rumors had been popping up. Aldis asked if they were rumors about the Grinder, a monster that lived in the Cannabis mountain range. The Grinder was known to be a hybrid of a bull and a horse, with 4 wings and sharp claws. It was said to be stronger than ordinary monsters, and thus was feared by many adventurers. When Aldis commented that he never expected the Grinder to come down from the mountains, Norris added that the number of predators around Thoria had recently decreased, which in turn led to an increase in herbivores, making the area a tempting hunting ground for the Grinder. Ted recalled that Aldis had previously said hunting had become more efficient with the help of a powerful woman, and that this might be related to the problem. Aldis asked if he was implying it was his fault, and all 3 of them agreed. Ted explained to Aldis that while monsters are dangerous, he shouldn't be hunting them to the point of extinction. Norris added that you shouldn't mess with the ecosystem, while Ophelia was surprised that her words had actually gotten through to Aldis. Aldis reluctantly apologized for causing them trouble. Ted then brought out a letter of request, stating that the army was forming a subjugation team to deal with the Grinder, and they were so pressed that they had to invite mercenaries to join. Ted wished he could refuse, but since it was a request from Lord Thoria himself, he couldn't. Norris said they'd be thrilled if a certain someone who was rude and antagonistic toward the army would agree to join them. Ophelia rephrased his statement, saying she'd be delighted to have a mysterious boy whose identity, rank, and even monster hunting methods were all unknown. Aldis understood their taunts, so he agreed to help, and after 2 days of preparation, a team was formed to subjugate the Grinder. They left Thoria and headed for the area where the Grinder was expected to appear. The area consisted mostly of flat plains, now filled with soldiers. The troops placed great hope in their captain, who was leading them on this crucial subjugation mission. Captain Deccan was pleased to also have the support of Captain Druce. Deccan was known as the army's finest swordsman, and the soldiers believed there was no way he could lose to the Grinder. In addition to the army, 9 mercenary teams were also taking part in the subjugation. However, Captain Droz wasn't comfortable with the army having to hire mercenaries. Deccan insisted that they didn't need to rely on the mercenaries' strength and could handle everything with their own military power. Dries wondered if Deccan had gotten over the incident that occurred when he'd been ordered to fight a female mercenary. He'd been told to defeat this female mercenary, who had been arrogant toward Lord Thoria. But when he went to teach her a lesson, Deccan had proudly declared that he would easily defeat her without any serious harm. The woman they were talking about was none other than Nolly, who had gone there on Aldis's orders on the very first day. That day, Nail had fought a soldier, who was none other than Captain Deccan. But their match ended the moment Deccan charged at her. His sword was sent flying in front of everyone, including the Lord and General of Thoria. Deccan was shocked to be defeated by a woman who hadn't even moved during the fight. The loss brought great shame to his name, and the fact that Deccan had been defeated in a single blow by a female mercenary became a hot topic of ridicule among all the soldiers. Deccan wanted to redeem himself by achieving something in the subjugation, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, on the mercenaries' side, Ted thought it was insane that the army was creating such ridiculous formations to take down the grinder. On top of that, Deccan hadn't even called for any mages, despite them facing a flying monster. Norris told the others that the army seemed to be filled with new recruits, nothing but rookies. Aldis, as mentioned, had joined the subjugation, and his attendant, Nail, also arrived after scouting the area, reporting to her master Aldis that she hadn't seen any monsters, let alone the grinder, in the vicinity. Norris asked if she was serious about calling Aldis her master, which made her furious. Ted told them it was time for lunch, while Ophelia was the only one unfazed by the sight of Nail flying around. Before they started their lunch in the field under the fine weather, Ted mentioned that beast kings often appeared in these parts. Nail then chimed in that she and Aldis had hunted about 50 beasts recently. Aldis gestured for her to be quiet, but Ted didn't find that unusual. He asked Naily if she wanted to join their party, seeing as she was so talented. Naily replied that if Aldis chose to go with them, she would follow. Ted started to relax a bit, since sitting around like this wasn't half bad, and they rarely got a break from work. Ophelia remarked on how nice the weather was. While Ted was feeling content with the gentle breeze and the shadow of a bird in the sky, but suddenly, he realized that the shadow wasn't from a bird, but from something enormous. It wasn't some monstrous bird or anything of the sort. Nail immediately told them that it was the grinder. Ted immediately told Norris to send up a smoke signal. And the grinder seemed to be heading in a different direction, toward where the main forces were stationed. Aldis and Nail decided to give chase. Both of them rushed towards the grinder, trying to minimize casualties. But when they arrived, Aldis's worst fears were realized. The grinder stood over the bodies of fallen soldiers. The survivors were wounded and screaming for help, but the grinder was about to attack them. A warrior threw a knife at the grinder, but it only caused a minor wound. Meanwhile, Aldis prepared a magical attack, performing a mock incantation, so the soldiers wouldn't notice. He launched a fire spell at the grinder, but it dodged by soaring into the air. The grinder suddenly unleashed a magical attack of its own, but Nail managed to block it just in time with his shield. Aldis knew he couldn't use his sword magic in front of the soldiers, and the grinder started to fly away, heading towards the rest of the army. When Captain Drews stopped Aldis and demanded he use magic to heal the wounded, Aldis refused, saying he didn't have healing abilities. Drews insisted he provide medicine or anything else, anything but let them leave, as he didn't think Aldis could catch a flying target. Aldis knew it was possible for him, but he couldn't do it with so many people around. Meanwhile, smoke signals began to rise from where the other squads were gathered. Captain Deccan warned the other soldiers, thinking that 30 men together would have no problem, and he was eager to be the one to defeat the grinder, no matter what. Then, a soldier reported the silhouette of something flying towards them. It was the ferocious grinder, and Deccan was thrilled to see it had finally arrived. He ordered everyone to get ready, but before he could finish his command, the grinder had already moved. killing several soldiers in the blink of an eye with its unstoppable claws. Decken realized what a serious threat they were up against. When the grinder flew up to prepare for another dive, Decken couldn't keep up with its speed. The grinder dove down like a nightmare, larger than anything Decken had ever experienced. He tried not to let himself falter, as this was his only chance to atone for his mistakes. If he ran now, it would haunt him with regret for the rest of his life. Decken ordered his men to hold their ground and aim for the grinder's claw, the one that was already injured, not by soldiers, but by Nail. The soldiers attacked just as commanded. But in the blink of an eye, everyone who charged forward was annihilated. Decken watched them die one by one as the grinder impaled them, tearing their bodies apart as if they were nothing but food. Decken realized he was powerless against this monster, and if they didn't retreat now, even more of his men would be slaughtered. Decken doubted if they could even wound it. Another squad of soldiers rushed down from higher ground and blindly charged the grinder. Decken tried to stop them, but it was useless, because the grinder used a powerful move called wind shear to cut down all the soldiers in its path in a single sweep. The soldiers' blood sprayed everywhere, and Decken felt helpless before this terrifying monster. Almost all the troops he had led were dead, and the grinder began to advance on Decken. Decken trembled even more as the monster drew closer. Then, an arrow shot through the air and struck the grinder's beak. Ted's Morning Star squad had arrived just in time to confront the grinder. Fearlessly, Ted charged forward, swinging his sword and aiming for the monster's neck. But he couldn't get close because of the grinder's wind magic. Ophelia began to cast a magic spell to restrict the grinder's movements. However, the monster easily destroyed all the ice she created, and all their efforts seemed to be in vain. But they couldn't give up. Norris kept firing his bow, while Ted attacked relentlessly with his sword. They were barely holding the monster at bay, while Decken was in complete despair. He saw that these mercenaries were highly skilled and well-coordinated, so they might have a chance against the grinder. But at the same time, when Ted's shield shattered, he was left with only his sword to fight. The grinder was no longer having a hard time dealing with them, and Decken understood that they were in danger. Norris shouted, asking where Aldis was when they needed him most. As the grinder prepared a powerful magic wind attack, Decken knew exactly how dangerous it was, so he yelled for everyone to run. Suddenly, one of the grinder's wings was sliced off, and as the wing fell, Decken realized the slash came from the mercenary Aldis. He had finally joined the fight against the grinder. This time, Aldis had no intention of holding back like before. He landed beside Ted's group. While the grinder shrieked in pain from the loss of its wing, Niall joined the battle as well, throwing her daggers into the grinder's left leg to make sure it couldn't run away like before. Aldis and Nail wanted to end this once and for all, and immediately, Aldis sliced off the monster's head, bringing the hunt to a close. Decken never expected that they would survive this battle. Hearing the voice of a soldier behind him, he quickly asked the soldier if he was all right. But it was no use, as Decken was the reason all the soldiers had charged in to attack without a plan. His reinforcements had been wiped out, and Decken was the only survivor from his unit. It was all over for Decken, and he knew his life would become a nightmare from this point on. He heard Nail talking to Aldis, asking if they should take just the grinder's head or the whole body. Aldis replied that the body was worthless, so they should just leave it. Decken looked at the two of them and realized that Nail was the woman who had started all his misfortunes. If she hadn't been there, he thought, everything would have been better. They both noticed Decken staring at her, and she stared right back at him, daring him to have any ideas about going against her. Meanwhile, Decken couldn't help but hate her even more afterward for the successful subjugation of the grinder. Lord Thoria and his army were praised for their efforts. According to the reports, it was the army that took care of the grinder, and Aldis didn't mind that at all. He just wanted to keep his life peaceful rather than deal with any hassles, and he was happy to have received his reward. Thus, the truth that the army had been useless in the fight, and that it was Aldis and the mercenaries who had fought the grinder, was kept hidden from the public. Now, at Lord Thoria's residence, the Marquis was sitting on his throne, with Costas and Deccan beside him in the court. The government minister asked Deccan if he knew why he had been summoned here, which he himself knew full well. Costas told Deccan that even when given a chance to redeem his honor, he still lost his men, and in the end, it was that female mercenary who took all the credit. Deccan pleaded with them for a favor, while the government minister declared that it didn't matter what his swordsmanship skills were like if he couldn't achieve anything for them. The Lord told Costas that they shouldn't discuss the matter any further, as anyone can make a mistake or two. He said he believed Deccan would become stronger after this incident, and Deccan nodded in agreement. The Lord Marquis reminded Deccan that if he thought this female mercenary was truly strong, then it was a frightening thing for someone so powerful to be wandering around unrestrained. He feared that one day she might disrupt their order, and what was more dangerous was that the female mercenary had no interest in or respect for the Lord Marquis whatsoever. The Marquis had deemed her a threat without any real justification, and Deccan muttered his assent to his words. Furthermore, the Marquis knew this woman had an ally, a boorish warrior who had rejected a personal request from the general in the past, which he found troublesome. Therefore, he thought of something and stared intently at Deccan. Deccan quickly requested that they allow him to handle the issue. The general told Deccan to focus on completing his current mission, or he could take time off from his official duties to act freely. Costas also said that he could train during that period, and they would assign him 6 soldiers under his command. The Marquis told him that he had the right to use them as he wished, and that this was his last chance to advance in rank, or he would remain nothing but a captain. Afterwards, Deccan left the court, and the surrounding soldiers jeered at him. Deccan was terrified that this mockery would stick with him for the rest of his life. While the Marquis asked Costas whether it was necessary to send an entire squad to deal with a single mercenary, Costas replied that sending more would be too unusual and would arouse suspicion, so he hoped sending Deccan would compensate for their lack of military strength. He remembered that the fortress he had sent Deccan to was currently vacant and could be used for training purposes. Costas's plan was to actually use Deccan to deal with Aldis and Nail, and if he failed, they would deny any connection between Deccan and Lord Marquis. So, it was best for Deccan to get a positive result, or he could be in deep trouble. Meanwhile, at Aldis's house, Philia and Rihanna were playing house together. They played with dolls representing a father, a mother, and 2 cute twin girls. Aldis watched the girls play peacefully, wishing everything could stay like this forever. But Aldis wasn't sure how much longer he could protect them. In the past, he had considered sending each of them to a different place to learn a trade, but neither of them wanted to be apart. They also didn't like wearing different clothes. In their little game, they still maintained their identical appearance, and Aldis realized he couldn't imagine letting the 2 of them leave his side. He realized he had grown softer, and the reason he was thinking this way was because the situation had changed so much from before. Lately, whenever Aldis went to town, he felt the atmosphere around him had changed. In the shop he usually visited to buy groceries, the saleswoman seemed uncomfortable as she handed him his things. Then, when he went to get medicine, the shopkeeper told Aldis not to come back to the store anymore. Aldis was certain that something had happened with the townspeople. As he was leaving the shop, the innkeeper, who had previously let him stay with the girls, called out to him from behind. Aldis remembered her, and she informed him that the girl's existence had been exposed to the public. Not only that, but the innkeeper also said that she normally doesn't reveal her customers' secrets. But when the soldiers came to her inn, she had to tell them about him because she would get in trouble if she lied. Besides, the soldiers had also been asking other customers, so it wasn't as if she could have kept his secret anyway. Aldis thanked her for letting him know about the situation. He pondered the reason behind the strange behavior of everyone around him.